Good afternoon. I'm Mr. Avis,
Mr. Wood.
and we're here today. We're going to do a little short tutorial on Jane Eyre and some themes. Um,
That's right, Mike.
how would you like to start there, Mr. Wood? What are we going to deal with first?
Well, let's start with the theme of love. In the novel, Jane looks for love, different types of love.
There's your symbolic heart, of
There's
course,
the
to
heart to
represent.
represent the love
All right.
that she's looking for.
Hmm.
One of the types of love she's looking for is motherly love. Jane is an orphan, and therefore she has lacked in her life motherly care. That her surrogate mother, if you like, is Mrs. Reed, but Mrs. Reed tends to favour her children over Jane, and Jane is very much mistreated, and we see that in the first chapter when she's sent unjustly to the Red Room.
And I think, Mr. Wood, not only are we discussing the motherly love that we have here in the presentation, but also that sort of family love that she's missing. The John Reed and Elisa and Georgina Reed, correct? Um, don't represent this sort of, or don't provide the sort of family love that that Jane Eyre requires, which isolates her even further.
Which is why she ends up trying to search for her own identity. Um, of course, when she goes to Lowood, Miss Temple provides some of that love. She takes her in. She understands. She believes Jane when Mr. Brocklehurst wrongly accuses her of being a liar, and Jane really benefits from that motherly love. Another character, of course, is St. John, who she meets later in the novel when she rejects Rochester's proposal, not of marriage, but of living as his mistress. She goes and she's rescued by St. John, but although he loves her as perhaps a sister, this isn't enough for Jane to give up her independence and go and live in India as a missionary.
But of course, I think these sort of brotherly love bonds you're talking about are a bit blurred with St. John. I mean, sometimes there seems to be an inkling of, although St. John is a very stoic character, very serious, very religious, there seems to be an inkling of some sort of, perhaps not romance, but something that's further on than just brother and sister. In fact, Jane Eyre proposes that they travel, but only as brother and sister, and this is not acceptable to St. John.
Absolutely. But in the end, of course, it's Rochester who's the love of her life. You know, he is her Prince Charming, if you like, the Byronic hero, and it is Rochester who she gets true love with, but of course it's only when she inherits the money is she able to facilitate her returning to Rochester and being able to marry him.
And this is what I think makes Jane Eyre such a sort of a landmark in Victorian literature, is that the last point we've got here is the idea of romantic love, marrying for romance, marrying for emotion, not marrying for image or status or whatever it is that was happening at the time.
Quite right, Mr. Davis. And one of the other things we'll look at later is the idea of that marriage market.
Right, so let's move on. What's another theme that we can look at here? And we've got identity. Maybe you can start by discussing it a little bit, Mr. Wood.
Yeah, absolutely. We already mentioned that, of course, Jane is an orphan, and as an orphan, not having parents, it's probably a little bit more difficult for somebody to find their own identity. We see that Jane, at the very beginning of the novel, is very passionate. She doesn't behave as a Victorian girl would have been expected to have behaved.
What would you consider? I mean, we've got here in the slide here that contrasting her passionate nature. I mean, she was called a wildcat by Bessie, I believe, or John, and you're contrasting with the sort of, in quotes, proper image. What was the proper idea of a Victorian woman at the time?
Well, a Victorian child was to be seen and not heard, and a little girl should be pretty and well behaved, and perhaps a little bit like Helen Burns is later in the novel. But Jane is unable to do that. She learns from Helen Burns. She learns from Miss Temple a little bit to be a little bit quieter, a little bit more reserved. And we see at some point in the novel, of course, her rejection, her sensible rejection of Rochester's proposal of shows that she is beginning to behave a little bit more like a young lady.
I mean, certainly you can contrast her behavior with that of Miss Ingram. I mean, she seems to be the stereotypical um, Victorian woman who's, you know, as you say, as a child seen, not heard, and as a grown woman to be humorous but not too humorous, intelligent but not too intelligent, but pretty and light.
Well, I mean, we also see Jane's independence in the fact that that afternoon she decides to leave Lowood, she advertises her services in the newspaper, and she takes that step of independence, which most Victorian women would not have been able to do.
Okay, so there's two. We've got identity, love, and now we're talking about moral courage, and morality seems to be quite an important theme in the novel. It says in order for Jane to be successful, she has to learn how to deal with the injustices she faces as a Victorian woman. She tends to, I think, especially when she's young, in Gateshead, the idea of this injustice, she seems to face it with, as we mentioned before, this sort of wildcat type of mentality where she speaks what she feels and she acts out. However, Helen Burns and Miss Temple in Lowood teach her this idea of perhaps not the Christian Stoicism, because it doesn't seem that Jane Eyre will really ever accept this sort of stereotypical evangelical Christianity, but the idea of not having to express herself so passionately in every instance.
Yeah, and I think that for the pupils, the question is to look for when and where Jane behaves in her passionate nature, if you like, and when she later actually does make some decisions which are based more on rationality than emotion. I mean, obviously, generally there's the belief that women are more emotional than men,
Right.
but even in those days there was a trying to lower that amount.
So
of
she's
emotion.
it's almost she's stuck in the middle here between the two extremes, and she's maybe trying to balance that as the book continues and finding a best way
But
through.
the question is again, what is Bronte trying to say? Is Bronte saying that people should behave like Helen Burns, or are they saying that people should behave as their nature determines and behave like
Well, again,
young Jane?
Helen Burns ends up dying in the first part of the book, so maybe that's a fairly good symbol of what
Yeah, and
Bronte
also
believed.
Helen Burns is in some ways seen as Jane's alter ego.
Right.
You know, once she dies, Jane is able to be a little bit more like her.
All right, so let's move on to another theme. We've got social class